Just in case you skipped the first conditioning, and this is the first one you're working on, I will repeat all the explanation about how conditioning and deconditioning work again here. I will eliminate a lot of this explanation for the last two conditionings. So if you already did the first one, some of this may be a bit repetitious. But if you follow along and answer all the questions out loud, you will decondition not meeting people's expectations, so it no longer causes fear. The single biggest source of your lack of self-confidence and your concern with the opinion of others is the beliefs you've just eliminated. In order to get rid of the last vestiges of this dual problem, however, you have to do something we call deconditioning. Being criticized and judged, not meeting the expectations of others, people putting their attention on you, and being rejected have all been conditioned to create anxiety in many people. Such people can have a problem asking for what they want, speaking up when others might disagree, and worrying about what others might think of them. It's not unusual to experience recurring negative feelings in our lives, such as fear, anger, guilt, anxiety, and sadness, every time specific events or circumstances occur. You might feel anxiety whenever you're not meeting people's expectations, or when someone rejects you. Or you might feel anger when you're told to do something. In many cases, the events that stimulate the feelings in you don't produce the same feeling in other people, and vice versa. Why does an event produce feelings in some people and not in others? Sometimes beliefs cause the feelings. Sometimes it's conditioning. You've probably heard of Pavlov's famous dog experiments. Pavlov presented the dog with food, and the dog naturally salivated. Then he rang a bell just prior to presenting the food. After numerous presentations of food after the bell, Pavlov rang the bell and no food was delivered. The dog, of course, salivated anyway, because he had associated the sound of the bell with the food. In other words, a stimulus, the bell, that normally wouldn't produce a hunger response did so because the dog associated the sound of it with the food. If the dog truly understood that it was the food that caused him to salivate and not the bell, which just happened to ring at the same time, would he still salivate when a bell was rung? Of course he wouldn't. Well, I'm going to help you avoid making the same mistake Pavlov's dog did. Namely, I'll show you how to make a distinction between what really caused your anxiety and unrelated events that just happened to occur at the same time. After you make that distinction, the stimulus will be deconditioned. Now, let's get rid of conditioning number 2, fear associated with not meeting people's expectations. Do you experience some level of anxiety when you don't meet people's expectations, or even think about not meeting people's expectations? Most people do, but not everyone. If you don't experience any anxiety at all when you don't meet people's expectations, please click the Next Conditioning button to go to the next conditioning. If you do experience even a little anxiety, just let the program continue to play. If you do experience some anxiety when you don't meet people's expectations, I've got some good news for you. Not meeting people's expectations does not inherently cause anxiety. If it did, everyone who ever didn't meet expectations would feel anxiety, and not everyone does. So you've been conditioned to feel anxiety when you don't meet people's expectations. Luckily, deconditioning is possible. In fact, you're going to do it right now. Imagine that as I gave you an ice cream cone, I drew back my fist as if to hit you. What would you feel? Fear, right? Now imagine that I made this threatening gesture when I offered you an ice cream cone 10 more times. If after the 10th time, someone else offered you an ice cream cone without threatening to hit you, what do you think you probably would feel? Fear again, right? Ice cream cones would have been conditioned to make you feel fear, because you felt fear every time you were given an ice cream cone. But can you get that the ice cream cone didn't cause the fear? It was the fist that showed up at the same time. If I helped you make this distinction, is it clear that being given an ice cream cone would never again produce fear? Now we're going to make the same distinction regarding not meeting people's expectations. If you're like most people, you probably first experienced anxiety associated with not meeting people's expectations when you were a child, and your parents got upset with you when you didn't do what they wanted you to do. That's how I felt when my parents got upset at me when I didn't meet their expectations as a child. In fact, I now realize that the anxiety was not caused by my parents' criticism and judgment. The anxiety was caused by the meaning I gave to my parents' anger or annoyance when I didn't meet their expectations. The same probably happened with you. Let me explain. When they got angry, how loved did you feel? Not very, I suspect. And because the people you depended on for your very survival seemed to be withdrawing their love, you equated that with possible abandonment. In your young mind, that meant no survival. In other words, anger meant no love. No love meant abandonment. And abandonment meant dying. You didn't consciously think all this out, any more than Pavlov's dog did. But that's how the subconscious conditioning took place. Can you see that it was this perceived threat to your survival that caused the fear? It had nothing to do with not meeting people's expectations. And because you never distinguished between the real cause of the anxiety, a perceived threat to your survival, and not meeting people's expectations, which just happened to coincide, not meeting people's expectations got conditioned to produce anxiety, just like the ice cream cone. But is it clear now, it wasn't not meeting people's expectations that produced your anxiety. It was the meaning you gave to the way your parents reacted when you didn't meet their expectations. Once you make this distinction, not meeting people's expectations will no longer cause you anxiety. I know that sounds too simple, too easy, but just stay with me and let's see what happens. It's worked tens of thousands of times. To understand even more clearly that not meeting people's expectations never caused your anxiety, imagine right now a childhood situation where you didn't meet your parents' expectations and they responded in a supportive and loving manner. Take your time imagining this. Use the pause button below if you need more time. Just now, as you imagine Mom and Dad discussing your not meeting their expectations in a loving, supportive way so that you didn't perceive a threat to your survival, did you just feel anxiety? I don't think so. And if you didn't experience anxiety in this childhood situation when you're not meeting people's expectations, you think you would today? Doesn't seem very likely, does it? Now close your eyes, take a deep breath, and then let it go. In your mind's eye, imagine a situation in the future that's never happened before, in which you're not meeting people's expectations. Right now, as you imagine it, do you still feel any anxiety? Say your answer out loud. You don't, do you? Please open your eyes. Once you clearly make the distinction between not meeting people's expectations, which didn't cause anxiety, and the meaning you gave to the way Mom and Dad reacted when you didn't meet their expectations, which is what really caused the anxiety, not meeting people's expectations will no longer produce anxiety. Now, either click on the Next Conditioning button and go to the next conditioning, or exit this program. Then make a note to yourself when you plan to return to complete this program.